The legislature, the Congress can cut mandatory spending. They're really not doing that. And then they're also moving money and adding dollars to the point where Ron Johnson has calculated approximately a $22 trillion addition to our debt in the next 10 years when everything rolls out. So there's games being played as well that, potential cuts are coming off in the future. Then there's the rescission packages. And so far, OMB has readied one $9 billion rescission package, and Congress is already balking at $9 billion. Okay, we have a $6.5 trillion budget, and Congress is balking at $9 billion in rescission. So what to do? Because I don't think we're going to see dramatic efforts by members of Congress. Mark Meckler joins me. There is a alternative, right? There's a plan B, Mark. And it's called the Convention of States. And that's probably what we're going to be left with as an option pretty soon, I think.
Look, I totally agree with you, as you know. And it's funny because we watch this. Some people say to me, Vicki, oh, well, Trump's in office. Everything's going to be okay. If you look at the big, beautiful bill, as he calls it, I think you could have a big bill. You could have a beautiful bill. I think you can have both. And in this case, and I don't say this to be critical of Trump, it's just because the way Congress works, they're not really cutting anything. You're going to end up with a larger deficit and a larger debt. And eventually we're going to hit a brick wall and the economy is going to crash, or they're going to have to inflate our way out of this thing. The only way to fix that is to force them to cut the deficit, is to force them to cut the debt. And the way you do that is by calling a convention of states. And one of the proposed amendments absolutely should be a balanced budget amendment with tax caps, with spending caps. And that will actually force them to get the fiscal house in order. I don't believe there's any other way.
I don't either. I mean, you don't, I guess you can't arm wrestle people like Javier Milei did in Argentina, where he actually got a legit 20% cut in government. Absolutely astonishing. We're not going to have that happen. We don't even have regular order. Regular order means taking individual appropriation bills and passing them individually and then doing a proper budget. We just do continuing resolutions, and we have for over 2 decades. So we're never going to do that. If you don't start at zero and then build on zero for your budget, then, you're never going to get ahead of the spending problem. And that's where we are. I blame Mitch McConnell largely because he's the one that cheered it on for 12 years in the United States Senate as a Republican. But generally speaking, there's no tea leaves to read that says these guys are finally going to get their act together.
Yeah, the reason I think that they ended up with Milei and they were able to cut there is because they had 1,500% inflation. I mean, we can't even imagine this. Our inflation goes up to 6, 8. And guess what you want based on what the real numbers were, maybe 15, 20% inflation. They had 1,500% annual inflation. That leads to complete and total economic collapse. That's the bags of cash that you go to the grocery store to buy a carton of milk. And so people were willing to take the pain, and the politicians were willing to take the pain. Even then, it's difficult. But we don't want to get to the point where we have 1,500% inflation. We don't want to get to economic crash. And the only way to prevent that I'm aware of is to call for a convention and to limit government spending. Because then the politicians, Vicki, they don't need the courage. They don't need the bravery. They can just say, hey, the people have put a constitutional limitation on us, and we don't have a choice but to do that.
Yes. See, now here's a whole bunch of reasons why this is an excellent idea. And we'll get to the complaints about the risk, okay? Because I think that always is important. I think people fantasize or have nightmares about what the risk could be of a convention of states or an Article 5 convention. But we'll go over that in a second. We would get a balanced budget amendment with caps. So you could not just tax us into oblivion. The debt crisis Ron Johnson consistently talks about brings us to Argentinian level of inflation potentially. It could do that, and it could do that in very, very short order. And that's if the interest rate on our debt resets to the historical average and people stop loaning us money. Everything we do is borrowed money. Everything we do. We borrow money for everything. And we're not willing to stop doing that. We actually, and it really aggravates me, Mark, because there was a time when we had a budget surplus. And that was under Bill Clinton, I'm sorry to report. But even under George W. Bush, we were cutting the deficit, the ongoing deficit, and the debt was stable. It was large, but it was stable. We're out of control at this point. So to not do it is to condemn the United States to utter disaster. And we have 320 million people who would be thrown into poverty, and many of them maybe even into starvation conditions in a really record-setting amount of time.
Yeah, no, the problem is that the ruling elites in this country, the self-appointed elites, they don't care. They wouldn't be among the starving. They've got their private compounds and their food stores and all that other stuff. They've got an almost infinite supply of money, much of it offshore.
Yes.
And so it wouldn't hurt them. And so when this whole thing comes crashing down, they'll be okay. It's regular folks like you and me and your listeners who will watch the food supplies run out, who will realize that their bank accounts are now empty, that all of their retirement accounts are gone. That's why we need to do this, and we need to do it now. We don't want to reach that point where that happens, where we're now imposing incredible austerity measures like what they've had to do in Argentina. We still have a chance to right the ship, but it's going to take us because Congress is not going to do it.
Right. And that's another thing. We can't count on us. That's another. But again, the preppers were right. You know, the best time to start prepping was yesterday, 25 years ago, maybe. But, the second best time is today. So, I don't know. I'm just thinking it would not be a bad thing to put back food, water, ammunition, et cetera, and ways to make sure you stay warm, especially in a state like Wisconsin. But the people, the people caved. The people were sheep during COVID. The people didn't push back at all at tyranny. I'm wondering if we can get this without needing, like a Tea Party movement to get it done. We're so close to getting enough states to critical mass that we can begin the process of actually doing this and then debating what kind of amendments we're talking about here.
Yeah, and look, there are still sheep out there, and I'm embarrassed to say that, sheep on our side, people who should know better. I'll name some names. John Birch Society is the leading sheep organization. Eagle Forum is another sheep organization. These are organizations that claim to be conservative but push back against the convention.
They're black pill. That's because they're black pill organizations. The organizations that say all hope is lost, therefore we will just sit around and gripe.
Yeah, I call them, they're literally the new proto-anarchists. And what I mean by that is they're willing to let everything just crumble and collapse. And you can call them bunker conservatives. Nothing will ever work. Nothing's going to be good. I don't agree with that. I have hope for our nation. The framers gave us this method. It takes 34 states to call a convention. 19 states have already done it. Actually, 19 and a half. We're halfway there in North Carolina. We can get this done, but people got to come out of the bunkers, and they got to be willing to get into the fight.
So this is the easiest way to do it, too, is to get state legislatures. All it is a resolution at the state legislature. So the easiest way to do it is to get state legislatures. Otherwise, you got to wait around for Congress to say, okay, let's put a balanced budget amendment to the people for a vote. They're never going to do it. Or term limits. Let's put term limits to the people for a vote. Said no congressman ever, because they like $174,000 a year, a guaranteed pension, and, a lot of access to insider trading information. So that will never happen. And then the process, this is going to be a process. We actually may be in a debt crisis by the time we get through this process. But then how does it work? Because what the black pill bunkered conservatives say is that it'll be a runaway convention, and the left will seize control, and they'll eliminate the Second Amendment, and they'll eliminate the First Amendment, and they'll eliminate the Fourth Amendment, and it goes like that.
Yeah, look, and I used to be a lot nicer about this. You and I have been talking about it for a long time. I'm going to say at this point, those people are simply idiots. The facts are out there. Those arguments came from the radical left. They were created originally by Chief Justice Hornberger, the Chief Justice who gave us Roe versus Wade. They were backed up by professors from Harvard and Yale. And the plan, an actual plan, was to keep conservatives from using Article 5. It can't run away, Vicki. It takes 34 states in advance to agree on subject matter. That's a supermajority, and the subject matter is limited to anything that would impose fiscal restraints. That's where the balanced budget comes in, tax caps, spending caps, anything that would impose term limits on Congress, but also deep state term limits. I call it the Fauci Amendment. There should never be another Anthony Fauci. And finally, anything that would impose scope or jurisdiction restraints on the federal government. In other words, no Department of Ed, no Department of Energy, no USDA, no FDA. These are national entities at the federal government level that were never meant to exist. So 34 states agree. That's all we're going to talk about. Get into convention. It takes 26 states to propose an amendment, and then it's only a suggestion. It goes out to the states that has to be ratified by 38 states. Nobody's ever been able to explain to me as a conservative something I wouldn't like and then list the 38 states that will ratify it.
Exactly, right. I mean, I wanted this 15 years ago when you and I first started talking about this, Mark. And now it's like we love to do this to ourselves. We like to run up to the very, 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 very edge of the cliff, right when we're kind of teetering over. We're sort of losing our balance, and it's going to go one way or another. We're going over, or we're not going to die, and that's where we are. At least financially, that's where we are. Again, Congress has an opportunity here. And I don't know what's going on with OMB. I don't know why they can't even. So we hear about $9 billion in rescission. But, first off, DOJ identified over $180 billion just immediately. Never mind the $4 trillion in waste, fraud, and abuse in Social Security over the last 25, 30 years, which you can't get back. Just the stuff we can get rid of now, $180 billion. And you guys can't even put the final touches on $9 billion and get it to a vote. And they're already balking at the idea of $9 billion. We're never going to fix the fiscal ship of the United States if we wait around for Congress to do it. And I'm telling you what, voting them out doesn't work. We've been saying vote them out for the last 40 years, and we just get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, it's funny talking about cutting $9 billion. My understanding right now is our debt payments, just the interest on our debt, every morning the clock resets $3 billion a day. So that's 3 days of interest we're thinking of and struggling to cut from the budget right now.
$3 billion a day in interest on our debt. $3 billion. And they can't get rid of 3 days worth of interest on our debt. That so far, hope springs eternal. The other great thing about this is the people who run Washington are whoever pays Washington. And we don't. They take us for granted. We don't have a lobbyist. Our lobbyists were supposed to be Congress. But Congress doesn't do our bidding. Congress does the bidding of whoever pays them. So you have lobbyists, and they run the show. That's why it's been, why we got crazy things like you can't sue vaccine manufacturers. Why we got crazy things like Boeing, not being able to deliver 2 airplanes, and they're $3 billion over budget. That's how we got here. We got here by basically letting people hire firms to push things that we would never, ever vote for if we had a chance to do it. And that's how Mitch McConnell got bought off to get us to the point where we are $37 trillion in debt now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, anybody who thinks that the federal government is going to fix itself is either just stupid or they're intentionally ignorant. In other words, if you look at the history of the country, the entire history, back to the very first administration, the Washington administration, every single administration has grown the size and scope of the government with the exception of Calvin Coolidge. We had one in all of American history. And so if we want this to change, if we believe it needs to change, and I believe we'll lose our country unless we change it, the only way is if we, the citizens, get engaged. That's the mechanism the framers gave us, which is to call an Article 5 convention.
Where does Wisconsin stand on this, Mark?
Wisconsin passed it. And I think this is super important because people look at Wisconsin like it's a blue state. You guys have the Supreme Court problems, all this stuff. But you guys already did it as a swing state. So this can be done and should be done all over the country. We have states like Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Ohio that haven't passed it yet when Wisconsin already did. I think the rest of the country should be embarrassed. But if you're in Wisconsin, you should still get involved because we need to protect that resolution, and you can help the other states. People can do that at conventionofstates.com.
Yeah, protect the resolution because the Democrats are making a run to take control of the legislature, and you can see them dynamiting that thing, once they get total power. And we don't want to see that happen because that was a bit of a heavy lift for our legislature. At least I remember the one resolution was a bit of a heavy lift.
Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely.
Where can people sign up? Where can people get involved? This is a great thing to kind of focus your energy on because you're sort of don't become that bunkered conservative. Although I do think you should prep. I do. I really think you should go.
I agree.
I think you should put some food back, and I don't mean just a couple of weeks. But that don't let that turn you into a sort of black-pilled conservative that says all hope is lost. Let's just be Slim Pickens and ride the bomb down. So where can people kind of focus their attention and get involved and get active on this?
Yeah, people can go to conventionofstates.com. Conventionofstates.com. We do a lot more. We do pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, property tax reform, election integrity. At conventionofstates.com, or they can follow me at Mark Meckler on X.
Follow Mark Meckler, Meckler, and conventionofstates.com. I think it's time Levin blew the dust off that Liberty Amendments book of his and started going on the road with you guys. We got to light this up again, Tea Party style. Thank you so much for joining me, Mark, as always.
Always great to be with you.
Good to have you. And we'll take a break on the Vicki McKenna Show.